Hi all. In this module, we're focusing on leadership in groups. So the readings provide a variety of different ideas about leadership and how it's enacted in different group settings. For example, we get some different definitions of what leadership means and descriptions of how leaders emerge in groups, what it means to have truly shared leadership, how our social understandings of gender and diversity influence what we think of as leadership, and some of the differences between leadership in face-to-face in virtual settings. In this video, I just want to talk about a couple of key ideas that I think are relevant that kind of run through the readings and have impact on the way that we think of leadership in groups kind of over time. So the first thing I want to talk about is how we can understand leadership as a set of communication competencies. This is in the textbook chapter and is evident in some of the other places as well. So the basic idea here is that instead of seeing leadership as a trait that only some people have, we can understand leadership as a set of communication behaviors that people can learn and develop. So this model is important because it helps leaders assess their own abilities and set goals for development. So there's three different kinds of competencies. The first one is procedural leadership competencies, and these are the communication behaviors that help coordinate group activities. For example, things like setting up guidelines for information sharing or decision-making processes are procedural competencies because those guidelines help shape the group process. Some of the basic stuff we've been doing in this class about how to facilitate meetings, which we'll go into in more detail in another module, and how to set up decision-making and analyze problems and things like that are really relevant to the sort of procedural leadership competency. So another one is relational leadership competencies, and these are communication behaviors that express support and help group members cooperate. So for example, this includes listening, managing conflict, and helping build a supportive group climate. And finally, technical leadership competencies are those skills that are specific to the task at hand. So there may be situations where having good computer skills is really important, or having knowledge of a particular issue that's relevant to the group task. Those are examples of sort of technical competencies. Now, people who demonstrate these competencies through their communication tend to be seen as leaders by their peers, regardless of whether they hold a formal leadership role. And a lot of what we've done in the class has focused on helping you develop your procedural and relational competencies, right? So that could very well position you to be a leader in your group. If this is something you want, then take a close look at the information on how leaders emerge in groups so that you can be aware of the typical communication patterns in your teams. I know that there have been situations where people have looked to me as though I was the leader and kind of expected me to step up and take on leadership roles because I had talked earlier in a meeting and maybe I had demonstrated some of these competencies. So this is the kind of thing that, leadership sometimes is from a role, a formal, like a title, but other times is kind of emergent and expected from others based on the communication competencies that you have. But viewing leadership as a set of competencies can also help us see that leadership is a process. It's something that everyone in the group can participate in. So I think this is really interesting because it means that leadership doesn't have to be restricted to just a few people who are in designated roles. Leadership can be sort of distributed throughout the group, with people having different sets of competencies. Some people might be very good at the technical competencies but need help from somebody else in the group to do some of the procedural competencies, right? So ideally a group would be able to integrate all of these leadership competencies into their processes, but they don't all have to come just for one or two people. So knowing about these competencies can help you provide opportunities for other group members to develop their leadership skills. So in this way, the communication competency model is also a good foundation for developing shared leadership in groups. Okay, so another big idea from the reading is this concept of transformational leadership. And this is a particular kind of style of leadership, but it's also seen as there's been a lot of research in group communication and in organizational behavior and even in political science around this idea of sort of transformational leadership. So transformational leaders are these charismatic, larger than life visionary leaders who inspire people to act. Like a lot of our historical leaders, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., sort of famous business leaders like Steve Jobs of Apple, or some of the folks who are in the news now as being kind of leaders, political leaders, can be understood as sort of transformational leaders. We usually think of transformational leadership as really good. We see these leaders as sort of role models, and we're emotionally moved by their ability to create a compelling vision for our group or organization. So transformational leaders are essentially really great storytellers, and they can inspire and empower group members through their narratives. So the textbook chapter describes how you can develop your own abilities to be a transformational leader, right? Sort of thinking about where you get your sort of energy and your charisma, how to develop your own ability to sort of share this kind of big vision. And I think that is great in some ways, but I will also give a word of caution because I think sometimes transformational leaders can mislead people and kind of obscure information and inspire folks to do unethical things. So even though we might be inspired by them, it's important for those of us who are maybe in the role of followers in a group to keep clarity on our own values and maintain our critical thinking skills so we don't get swept up in something that we don't actually believe in, right? Thinking about groupthink and some of those other things that we've looked at earlier in the course. So don't be blinded by charisma and lose your ability to be a thoughtful, ethical, productive group member. I think we as a society place too much emphasis on charisma and transformational leadership. And although this approach is useful when groups are facing a crisis and we need a clear, motivating vision to all work toward together, it should, for the most of the time, be balanced with this sort of critical discussion, empathy, and deliberation from a wide range of different group members so that charisma doesn't lead us to like authoritarianism or authoritarian approaches to leadership, right? And good leaders should be flexible enough to communicate well with different groups of people, adjust their leadership style appropriately, and have the ability to step aside when needed to empower others and help them develop their own leadership competencies. So as you work with the ideas in this module, I encourage you to reflect on what kind of leadership competencies you have and how you can develop leadership in your teams. And that's it for now. As always, I look forward to reading your discussions and reflections about these ideas, and I hope that this is helpful for you as you think about your work in this class and then also groups that you participate in your organizations and other aspects of your lives.